when you try to, when we joke about, hey, I'm here to install the Agile in your organization, I will show you the way to do Agile. A lot of that comes, and I've been guilty of that in my career, I'm pretty sure as well. But a lot of that comes across as, I'll pick condescending at best, especially if I'm sitting here, I've been doing my work the way I've been doing it for a while, and I feel like, but it's reasonably successful. Why are you asking me to change all these things? This doesn't make sense to me. If you can refocus the conversation around, here are the problems we're trying to solve as an organization. Here is what we're trying to do better. We are trying to get closer to our customers so that we can make sure that we are really delivering the things that they are looking for.
Ellen, so nice to have you. I remember taking your class a few years ago, the Agile Team Facilitation, and I totally fell in love with it. Your approach, the sketches, it was so much fun. So I thought I'd invite you to be a guest on my YouTube channel and talk about your journey coming into the Agile world. Very, very nice to have you. And I'll let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Netta, because it's delightful to be here. And just about the Agile Facilitation class, I'm just going to say, I miss teaching that class in the short term. It was so much fun. It was so much fun, working with people to help them understand the importance of good facilitation and find some different ways to approach it. But to circle back to introducing myself, my name is Ellen Grove. I'm based outside of Ottawa, Canada, and I usually describe myself. I'll start with, I'm an Agile coach, I'm a facilitator, I have a background as a software tester, maybe we'll dig into that a little bit. And the current role that I hold, which was one of the surprises of 2020, is that I'm the interim managing director of Agile Alliance.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm really curious about how you got into Agile in the first place.
It's kind of funny because it was like much about my career. I'm going to describe it as accidental. Working in tech was actually my second career. Before I jumped into the tech world, I worked with people with disabilities to help them integrate more effectively into society. And by a strange twist of fate, which had to do with the politics in the province of Ontario at that time, I ended up joining Corel Corporation as a junior software tester because I'd done a little bit of desktop publishing along the way, and they were looking for people who would test a consumer graphics product. And from there, I ended up at Nortel testing network software. It was kind of weird. I got recruited to help build a software team for a company that had been a startup. And I mention this because this is important to the Agile journey. It was a small team. It was very close knit. They were used to doing everything together. And then as that team got bought by another company, which was merged with Nortel. So suddenly we were still part of a very large enterprise, but we were still used to working as a very close-knit team where we collaborated a lot, where we didn't have as firm boundaries between roles or as much process as a team that had started off in a large enterprise might. And somewhere along the way, I was leading a software team. I was a development manager at the time. And Nortel came out with the one true way it wanted teams to work to develop software. They were trying to standardize on a process to make it easier for people to move between teams in the organization. And from that point of view, that made sense. But when I looked at this process and tried to figure out, how is our team going to work this way? Because we were a much smaller group. We had a different kind of relationship with our clients and things. And we'd sort of thought about, we'd looked into extreme programming. We kind of looked at a couple of Agile ideas, but we hadn't been serious about it. And we looked at this big process that the company wanted to impose on us and said, we can't do that. It doesn't make sense for how we work. It doesn't make sense for how we interact with our customers. But saying back to the organization, hey, we're not going to do your stupid process because we think it's stupid, wasn't the great message to send. So at that point, we had to get serious about, well, what are we doing instead? And that's where, with the support of my director and his director, we started to dig into, okay, so what would it mean to really be an agile team? What would we have to do? What would we have to change about how we're doing now? And I worked to help educate my organization, like my corner of the organization, my team, about what does it mean to be an agile team. We were working on a multi-team project, so we didn't really start small. My first foray into agile was, hey, let's do this with 4 teams scattered across 2 continents, all working together on something brand new. It's like, let's not start with the easy stuff. But we decided we were going to be serious about working in an agile way. And I was one of the leaders within my organization to help figure this out, mostly because I'm a curious person and I like to try new things. I like to help people figure out problems. And one of the things that struck me about it is that a lot of what goes with becoming agile is figuring out, how do you build community around solving a problem together? So rather than how do we take this complex problem, we're building a complex software system to do something, and we're breaking the problem into components and assigning those components to different groups of people and hoping it all fits together when we bring it back together. A more agile approach is, wow, we have a complex problem. Who are the people we need to address that problem? Who are the people who are going to solve the problem? Who are the people we're solving the problem for? Who are the people who care about the problem? And how do we put some structure around bringing them together to work together to solve the problem iteratively and incrementally? And that for me is what's at the heart of Agile. So that's how I started as my Agile journey. I sort of stumbled into being an internal, I would describe myself, I was a Scrum Master, and I was the de facto internal Agile coach, not because I was hugely skilled, but because I was like one step ahead of everybody else in my organization with the research I was doing and the people we were talking to. And then when I left Nortel, because it was Nortel and it was a difficult period in that company's history, I went to another project that was not an Agile project. And I realized at that point that, I really don't want to work that way anymore. I really want to go back to figuring out, how do we use these ideas? How do we work by Agile values? And since then, I've worked with a number of organizations. I've hopefully helped a number of organizations to become more agile and to understand the importance of how do we improve those interactions around complex problems. One of the pivotal things for me along the way that happened is I went to Agile Coach Camp in 2008. And that was for me a life-changing event. And I got involved in organizing other Agile events and other Agile Coach Camps, first on a local scale, and then on a more national, and even then after that, international scale. And sort of that's how I got involved with Agile Alliance in the first place.
Wow, that's quite a journey. And it's so interesting the way you describe your beginnings. It sounds like you created your own opportunity. Did they actually have an opening for a Scrum Master or an Agile role at the very beginning when you got into it? Or was it more of a role that you created for yourself?
It was definitely a role that I created for myself in that context, in that I think probably my official job title at that time was I had been a QA team lead. I had been a manager of a software team. At that time, my official title was probably, I was development manager for
Wow.
one of our products. And we decided we wanted to work in an agile way. And the first path that we followed was Scrum. We went off and I did some Scrum training. And so that was the pattern we were using. And it was like, okay, somebody who has to be the Scrum Master. Who's going to be the Scrum Master? I guess I'm going to start off being a Scrum Master because I know a little bit more about it than anybody else in my organization, while I was helping to roll out training and, helping our teams figure out how we were going to do this. So it's like, I guess I'm the Scrum Master for now until somebody else steps up and wants to fill that role. And then I mentioned it was a distributed team, right? And we had these 4 teams that were working together. And one of my peers kind of fell into the role of being the, Scrum of Scrums master. And I might have mentioned that I didn't think he was doing a very good job of it. And it's like, okay, well, if you don't think it's working out well, why don't you take on that role? Okay, I guess I kind of asked for that. And I think that actually describes a lot of my career path, to be honest, is creating those opportunities, and maybe doing them in a more constructive way than I might have when I was younger, but going, hey, there's a problem to solve, there's a space to be filled. I'm going to take a stab at filling that space. I'm going to try. And I want to highlight that because I question myself a lot doing that. The question that I ask is, who am I to do this thing? Who am I to be the scrum master for my team? Who am I to sort of step up and become the agile coach? I'm not really any more experienced than anybody else. Who am I to do this thing? And it's like, well, if not you, who else? Try it. Try it and see how it works out. I think a lot of us are often afraid to go, I'm not sure if I'm the right person to do that. And you won't know until you try it.
That's incredible advice. And that's something that I talk to a lot of my clients about. You don't have to wait for an agile posting, agile coach posting, or scrum master posting to create those opportunities and to bring in the agile mindset and that and create the path for you to basically play those roles. What's some advice would you give to people who are trying to get into becoming? I mean, I get a lot of people who say, I love Agile, I want to get into it. How do I get into it? If you were to draw a parallel from what has worked for you, being that person at the beginning, what would you say to those folks?
I think so. In addition to the try it, because this is also at the heart of Agile, right? I talked about part of it is about building community about a problem, but part of it is also about within that community or with whoever you're working with, maybe in this case it's just yourself, forming this hypothesis about, if I think, if I try this, I believe this is what will happen, or designing this experiment for yourself. In fact, I want this kind of outcome, here's an action that I might try to go in that direction, let me try that. And it's not about the job title necessarily. It's not about your role in the organization. There have been places along my career where my title was, for example, one place along the way, I was the director of software testing or director of quality. I can't remember what the business card actually said. And that in that role, I was also an internal agile coach, because in addition to leading the software testing efforts, I was also leading the organization in how do we change how we're working. And that's really important for organizations to make the change. It's not that an agile coach comes in and makes the change for the organization. What an agile coach does is comes in and helps the organization to change itself. And for that to happen, it's really important to have people in every part of the system who are keen to work in an agile way, who recognize the importance of experimenting and retrospecting on the experiments to decide what you're going to do. And that's where, if people are thinking, how do I get my break in the agile world? Well, what's the other thing that you do besides being an agile person? Maybe you're a technical writer, maybe you're a product person, maybe you're even customer support. You're that window to what the customer needs. You can take the agile values and the agile principles and think about, how do they affect what I'm doing? How would they change how information is flowing through the system? How would they change how we're getting feedback as quickly as possible about whether we're doing works or doesn't work? And you can bring agility into the system that way without having the title of agile coach or scrum master or product owner, or whichever sort of more official agile label. And don't wait to have that label. That would be the other thing too. Don't wait to have that label. You can start to introduce those ideas from anywhere.
That's probably, the best takeaway that people are going to take from this video is don't wait for that. Don't wait for that label, for sure. What is something that you could advise employers on when they look for people who could fill that agile coach role. It's really challenging, from the employer perspective, from the job seeker perspective. Sometimes I get, feedback around, oh my goodness, this job posting sounds like a project manager job posting.
Mhm. And it's hard because you're trying to make change in a lot of well-established patterns, right? And if you're looking for a good agile coach, if you're looking for somebody who's going to help your organization change, I think there's a few different things you have to think about. You have to look at, does this person have some understanding of the problem domain that we're working in? Because that's not essential. I'm going to say that's not essential to being a great agile coach, but it definitely helps, especially along the way, if you understand, hey, if you understand software, or you understand HR, you understand the system that people are working in. Because I'm thinking it from the point of view of, I like the Agile Coaching Institute model of all the different skills that you need to be an agile coach. You need to understand about lean and agile, but you also have to have some coaching skills. You also have to have some domain knowledge. You have to have a lot of different things. I think it's really important to look for people who have an understanding of agility, and that doesn't necessarily correlate to the number of certifications that they hold. And it's not that I think certifications are, I think the learning that goes with certifications is great. I think there's a lot of good, there's a lot of good learning, there's a lot of good knowledge that gets transmitted. But you can't rely on that exclusively to determine, will this person be a skillful agile coach or not, right? Because a lot of it comes with practical experience. A lot of it comes with, how do I work with others in the organization to implement those ideas that I have learned in the course of doing these certifications? And so thinking about, how will this person be able to influence others? And I think that's really critical, because I know certainly in the early days in my career, treated it a little bit more as I treated agility a little bit more as a recipe than I do now, in that, ooh, here's a set of practices. Here is the way we will be agile. In order to be agile, we must do these things. And what I've discovered in the intervening years, having worked with a number of organizations, is, well, what we need to do to be agile is some of those frameworks, some of those practices are a great starting point. And in fact, some of them are essential. But it's really developing the ability in the organization to figure out, okay, how do we structure ourselves differently so that we create those feedback loops, so that we focus on, how do we do the most important thing? How do we do the smallest slice of it that's possible? How do we determine, did we do the right thing or not? And hopefully we worked with the people who are going to make that decision before we started doing the thing, right? So that we got their input into how we were going to do it. And then how do we repeat that, and how do we amplify it? And so finding people who can help shape your organization to do that, sometimes it's a little bit hard to spot on a resume, right? And I know that's how, I live in a government town, and there's a lot of, there's a certain way hiring works, and you have to have certain letters after your name to even make it through the hoops. But in terms of looking for who can help me change my organization, I think you have to look at, how does this person influence people? How do they influence people? What do they understand about the domain that we're working in? What do they understand about working in an agile way? What is their agile? What is their lean background? And sort of look at the combination of those things in order to determine who can help us make change.
It sounds like being a change agent is one of the biggest, skill sets that would make an agile coach slash scrum master successful. And I love, the class that you were teaching with the facilitation, because I feel that facilitation is one of those tools that can help us with the influence. What other things can people work on? And it's so tough because it's a catch-22 where you need the environment and the space to be able to hone those skills, because it's not about memorizing. the liberating structures or
Yeah.
memorizing a bunch of, soft skill techniques. You got to be able to apply those things. But what would you say are things that people can do, let's say, if they're not given this, they're not in a current environment that allows them to practice those things?
Yeah. It's so building your toolkit is really important. And we talked about it. It's not about being able to, having an exhaustive knowledge of all of the liberating structures, for example, but it's about recognizing those things are there, recognizing that, wow, I want to have a variety of ways that I can help set people up to interact differently. Um, how do I increase my awareness of that? And how can I start to slide some of these things in? I mean, one of the things we talked about in the facilitation class, right, is how can I facilitate from any chair in the room, even if I'm not the chair of the meeting or officially the facilitator? What are the things that I can do to help nudge the group in the right direction? And I think that's a really critical thing to keep in mind. The other thing that I think is really important is a lot of the ideas that make working in an agile way really valuable are about how are we focusing on what is valuable? How are we focusing on what is the outcome we're trying to achieve together? How do we make sure we're maximizing for outcome and not doing things that are not taking us to where we need to go? And you can start to ask questions within your team, within your job role, within your system that will point people in that direction. I mean, it's funny because one of the moments that sticks most with me as a coach that I think of, oh, this is how I know I'm making change, is I was working in I'll just say it was a large federal organization. And I was in a meeting. There were a lot of people with suits. Our clients were there. And somebody who I thought of as being in the client group, it wasn't even somebody who I was working with that directly. But in the course of that meeting, they said, okay, so there's a lot of conversation going on here, but I'm going to stick up my hand. I'm going to ask the Ellen question. What is the value we're going to get out of doing this particular thing that we're debating right now? And I was like, I was thrilled, but I was like, that's how you know that you're making change. And that's how you know your organization is becoming more agile. It's when we're really focusing on what is the value we're seeking here so that we can hone that conversation in and we can hone how we're working in on how do we realize some of that value as quickly as possible. And so the other part of that too, that I just want to highlight is I joke, the longer that I work in Agile, the less I talk about Agile. Because I think one of the things we do is we get caught up in the jargon. We get caught up in some of the, there's some odd terminology that comes with it. There's some things that we've gotten hooked on talking about, is this Agile or is this not Agile? That's not the question that we need to be asking. It's, is this getting us the value we need on the time scale that we need that we need the feedback on, so that we can do more of what we can do more of the valuable stuff and less of the stuff that isn't valuable. And so I joke with some of my colleagues that I talk less about Agile than I used to, even though, because I found that makes it easier too, as a change agent in an organization, to be able to bring people in, because the language doesn't become a barrier anymore. It's like, if we're focusing on what's the most important thing to do and how quickly can we do it and how quickly can we get information about, did we do it right and did we do it the right way to solve the problem? People who don't necessarily want to engage in some of the other ideas are like, yeah, that totally makes sense. Why wouldn't we do that? And they're on board.
That's amazing advice. It kind of reminds me of when you're having a conversation with a doctor and you're trying to understand what's going on, and they throw all this complicated jargon in your face, and all of a sudden you just feel alienated and you can't even collaborate with them or understand what's going on. But when you're, speaking to a down-to-earth doctor who uses simple language, analogies, and to get through to you, all of a sudden, you're part of the process and you feel that like you're more empowered to work with them. And that's advice that I give people when it comes to interviews as well, is treat it as a two-way conversation, and for a lack of better term, dumb it down, simplify it. Don't throw all the technical jargon and overwhelm people, because then they're going to be lost and you're creating this disconnection rather than building rapport. And at the end of the day, we're human beings. We got to feel comfortable working with each other.
We have to feel comfortable in working with each other, and we also have to recognize the value in the change that's being proposed to us, right? And when you try to, when we joke about, hey, I'm here to install the Agile in your organization, I will show you the way to do Agile. A lot of that comes, and I've been guilty of that in my career, I'm pretty sure as well. But a lot of that comes across as, I'll pick condescending at best, especially if I'm sitting here, I've been doing my work the way I've been doing it for a while, and I feel like, but it's reasonably successful. Why are you asking me to change all these things? This doesn't make sense to me. If you can refocus the conversation around, here are the problems we're trying to solve as an organization. Here is what we're trying to do better. We are trying to get closer to our customers so that we can make sure that we are really delivering the things that they are looking for. We are trying to improve the quality of the work that we do because we know we have great ideas, but we're all tired of sitting in defect triage meetings this long. And surely there's something that we can do to reduce the number of defects that are introducing themselves into the system, or worse, that are being discovered after we put something that we think is done out into the field. Here is, we have some, we don't know what it is we need to create because we know there's a problem that our customers want us to solve, and we haven't figured out how we're going to solve it for them. How do we put a process in place that allows us to go iteratively and incrementally and put some safety nets around that so that we can do some experimentation to figure out the right way to proceed without investing too much up front, right? Those are problems that people probably care about a lot more than how can I be a scaled, how can I be an Agile organization? How can I scale Agile within my organization if it's not anchored to what are the problems that we are trying to solve by doing that? So leading with the problems and going, I have some ideas, and mapping them to how it might solve the problems really can help anchor, can make that change more interesting, and make people more interested in participating in it.
How would you advise folks who are sitting in an interview as job seekers? And I know you've been a hiring manager as well, so this is going to be very helpful for people. Um, and let's say, the hiring manager is describing all these tasks that are supposed to be, they frame them as Scrum Master tasks. Like, we want you
Yeah.
to create these reports, and this is how we want you to do things. Um, and then you have your job seeker sitting there, and in their head they're like, oh my God, this is not really agile. How do you advise them to navigate these conversations, especially when they haven't even been hired yet and they're reporting into someone who may not be as knowledgeable in terms of infusing agility to improve ways of working, but needs to be influenced in order to get hired?
Yeah. So it's a little difficult to dig into in that circumstance, right? Because part of it is like, it's one of those situations where it's a little challenging to influence from the outside, particularly if there's a job that you might really need on the line. But where I would be inclined to help guide that conversation, because a job interview should never be a one-way conversation, right? You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, is I would start to ask some questions about what is, in terms of the tasks. So say this is for a Scrum Master job, as we would expect you to be doing this, this, and that. I might start to ask some questions about, I agree that some of those things are really important for the team to be doing. And as a Scrum Master, my role would absolutely to make sure that those things get done. Because in the case of if the role is defined as Scrum Master, absolutely, some of those things, it is the Scrum Master's job to make sure that they get done. Doesn't necessarily mean that the Scrum Master's job to do them. But in a more traditional organization, they did definitely see that as the project manager does this. And I would start to sort of feel that out a little bit in an interview and go, to get a sense of, am I going to be evaluated on whether I do this, or do we share the idea that, yeah, a lot of these things are important to do, and it's important that the team does them, but it's not necessarily going to, it's not going to be me who people are looking at going, are you doing this? Are you doing that? Are you doing this? I would also ask some questions if is particularly if there's a lot of, I'm going to say, process focused tasks. I would start to ask some questions about how fixed is that process? Like, I understand the outcomes are really important, if information needs to flow here and decisions are getting made, but what opportunity is there within the organization to experiment with different ways of doing that? Because if you're looking for a role where you're going to be able to create that kind of experimental culture, and in a job interview, they're going, no, 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 this is fixed this way. Our group of experts over here has decided that this is the way that it needs to be done. And so we're looking to hire you in order to do this. I'm going to say that's a big signal about the nature of the organization. And as a job seeker, you might want to sit in the chair and go, is this the kind of job that I'm really looking for? And adjust your expectations accordingly. There's lots of good reasons to take that job, especially in a, especially if you're starting out, especially if, I'll say times are tough and sometimes people make trade-offs about the work that they take. But I would try to be really clear about what is the kind of organization that I'm moving into, and what is their appetite for change. Because being a Scrum Master, being an Agile Coach, is fundamentally a change agent job. Your job is to be a disruptor in the system and to encourage other people to ask those questions that are going to bring about more change and more disruption, right? Because it shouldn't, if you think it's, I'm the lone person in the organization doing that, that's a very lonely place to be. Your role is to encourage everybody to create a regular pattern of asking the question of, are we doing this thing the right, are we doing the right thing? And are we doing it the right way? And based on what we learn from answering those questions, to adjust what we do and how we do it. And if the organization isn't prepared for that, it might not be the right time for them to be thinking, hey, we are trying to become increasingly agile. Having said that, I think 2020 and 2021 is showing us everybody needs to think about, how do we improve our agility in our organization, because circumstances outside of our control are going to play havoc on whatever it is we're doing.
That's great advice. It sounds like asking also why, what's the reasoning behind doing things a certain way? Like if it's, oh, we needed to create these reports, what are you trying to measure? What is the purpose behind the report? Is there openness to look at other approaches in terms of how we measure performance, etc.?
Yeah, I think that's really critical. Now, sometimes that's hard to do in an interview situation, right? So that's something you need to be on the inside to ask. But there's a lot of those reports, there's a lot of those processes that are there in order for information to flow through the system and decisions to be made on it, hopefully. And that's where in the organization, when you start to ask the question about why, like what is the outcome of this data gathering and presentation exercise, whatever form it takes, if people can articulate that, oh, this information is important to get to this person or these groups of people, because then you're in a position to figure out, is there a different way we could do it that would be less overhead? So perhaps, do we even need to do this at all? Right? There's an awful lot of status reporting that exists in large bureaucratic organizations because this is how we've always done it. So do we need to do it at all? Okay, if we do need to do it, is this the best way to share that information and get the feedback we need on the time scale we need? Maybe we can find other ways of doing that. And sometimes, to be quite honest, sometimes there's just a trade-off to be made where, you know what, this is not a battle worth fighting at the moment. We'll just build into our planning that, yeah, we need to do this thing and it's overhead, because creating that interface to the rest of the organization this way will allow us to change how we're doing what we're, how we're doing what we're doing within our bubble. And as long as it looks the same to that part of the organization that's getting this information, they're not going to stop us from what we're doing. And that's a third tactic that you might take in that situation. But understanding the outcome of what is the purpose of this, how does it enable us to work, allows you to figure out which of those three, and that's three of a probably broader set of options that you might take. Coaching is helping individuals or helping groups of individuals identify goals and solve problems and supporting them in that thinking process without directing them. I think that's really critical as a change agent, because you can't make other people change. You can only help other people recognize the need for change and to make the decision to change themselves. And that's where I think coaching comes in, and that's where I think facilitation comes in as well, because so much of change is about changing how humans interact with each other, to have different sorts of conversations and work together to use new tools and to implement new processes. And you can't impose those new tools or design those new processes unless you have the participation of the people who are going to be affected by that. And that's where having some of those facilitation skills is critical. I think learning a little bit about even just change, because we think in the purest sense, we think of, working in an agile way. This is about changing how we do software development. Yes, it is about changing how we do software development or whatever problem space we're working in, but it really comes down to, it's about changing how people in organizations organize themselves to do their work. And there has been a lot of thinking and a lot of learning that's been done in the space that is labeled change management rather than agile, that is very useful in an agile context, right? So learning a little bit about that. How do I become an effective change agent? What patterns are there that I might try in order to make change in my organization, to make sure that people feel that they are heard, in order to communicate new ideas and make them important to people, in order to help people along that path doing things differently? That's another skill set in the toolbox. It's really critical.
And I think we're all curious about what you've been up to these days and your role at Agile Alliance, and what does Agile Alliance do?
Wow. Well, yeah, this was one of the unexpected changes in 2020 for me, because Agile Alliance is a international nonprofit member association for people who believe in Agile, basically. It was started, this year is the 20th anniversary of Agile Alliance. It was started in 2001 by some of the signatories of the manifesto and some of the other people who were leaders in the Agile community at that time. And what Agile Alliance is probably best known for is the Agile 2021, the Agile 20X conference, sort of the big conference where everybody from all of the different flavors of Agile thinking comes together to share ideas and share learnings so that we can advance the practice of Agile. Agile Alliance also has a big library of online resources from those conferences and from other activities that it runs. There's a bunch of other activities that Agile Alliance actually does run. Different conferences, different sorts of meetups, member-led initiatives where members come to Agile Alliance with an idea about, this is an aspect of Agile that I'm really interested in, like technical debt or business agility, or a current one that's getting a lot of buzz is Agile coaching ethics. We want to do some work in this area. Those are the kinds of things that Agile Alliance does, or does support for local communities as well. We sponsor a couple of, well, not a couple of hundred, we sponsor 100 plus meetup groups around the world. And, so we're connected to Agilists all around the world. So that was probably more than you asked for about what Agile Alliance does. But I had joined the board of Agile Alliance in 2017. And through an unanticipated series of events in 2020, first I got elected to chair the board, and very shortly after that, we needed to fill the role of managing director. And so I stepped into the role of interim managing director for Agile Alliance last summer. And I'm just going to say that's been a major learning curve, because it's one thing to be an internationally known Agile practitioner. I speak at conferences all around the world. And it's another thing to actually lead the organization at a time where our traditional ways of doing things, for lack of a better word, we'd run the Agile 20X conference for a number of years, and then we had to cancel it last year on short notice because of the pandemic, because it wasn't safe to get together. And last summer that was like, oh, that's great, we'll be back together in 2021. Well, So I've spent a large amount of my time this year working with a team to reinvent the Agile 2021 conference when it became clear that it wasn't going to be in person. It's not going to have a physical component. It's all going to be online because an online event is a very different event from an in-person event. So that's coming up in July, and I think it's going to be fantastic. We've got a lot of great speakers. We've got some really exciting things going on. We've got some super keynotes, and there's one thing I'm dying to announce, but it's not quite ready for prime time. But we've restructured the conference so it is more accessible to people from all around the world. There's programming happening in 3 time zones. So no matter where you are on the planet, there's something happening during your daylight hours. We made the sessions shorter because with Zoom, it's harder to focus for a longer time. So we ask people to shorten their talks and shorten their workshops to accommodate an online experience. There's a bunch of other things that we're doing differently, and that's been really exciting, but it's also been a lot of work to figure out how do we take this thing that's been very successful in one format and completely rebuild it for another delivery format. And we also did that with the XP conference that's coming up next week as well. So there's, it's been busy thinking about how do we take this opportunity that has been presented by COVID changing our business circumstances to do things in a way that make our activities more accessible to a global membership. How do we do these things in a way that makes sense for virtual presentation rather than relying on in-person get-togethers? It's been an exciting journey, but I'm pretty excited about what's coming up for Agile 2021. So I hope everybody is going to come.
I hope so too. I totally recommend it. I think it's a great opportunity. It sounds like an amazing event, and I look forward to seeing it in action.
I hope you'll be there. We're trying to bring the world to Agile 2021, and I think the program reflects that. We've got speakers from 22 different countries. We've got some big names. We've got a lot of people who you might not have heard of yet, but who have some really great ideas. It's gonna be fun.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Ellen. It's been a great conversation. I know folks are going to learn a lot. And yeah, thank you so much for giving your time to the community and sharing all this valuable information with everyone.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here today.